Hi, it's Maya here with my September reads and receipts, and in these videos I talk about the books that I read, my TBR account, how I did with my challenges, and if I hold some books I show them to you, and there are always timestamps in the description to the specific books that I'm gonna talk about. Last time I didn't do a fully scripted reads and receipts because that had become a bit of too much work right now, and I went with notes, and I'm gonna do that same thing now because I noticed that when I had fully scripted reads and receipts, I was like quite strict on going with the script, and my raw videos would end up to be 1 hour long that I would have to edit. And the last one I did was only half an hour long, so I think this one is working. Let me know what you think. So my TBR count at the start of the month was 68 books, and let's start with the reads. I started September by finishing my reread of the Murderbot novellas by Martha Wells. So those were Rogue Protocol and Exit Strategy. I read them from the library, and they were the third and fourth Murderbot novellas. And it's a science fiction novella series following Murderbot, who is this security android who has hacked its governor module and given itself that name. And it is socially anxious and likes to watch soap operas. The third novella, Rogue Protocol, is my least favorite installment in the series. It is more focused on action, but I do enjoy spending time with Murderbot always, and I really enjoyed the fourth novella, Exit Strategy. It's the last of the novellas, and the next book is a novel. Exit Strategy, I remember when I read it the first time I wasn't completely in love with it, but this time I was. And I think that is because I read the novellas back to back, so I was much more connected to the characters and their relationships, and they were fresher in my mind. So this time I really loved it. I stayed up finishing my reread of that quite late. So this is a great series and I highly recommend it. And I gave the third novella 3.5 stars because even though it's not my favorite, it's still Murderbot, and I gave the fourth novella 5 stars. I was planning to read the Murderbot novel right after finishing my reread of the novella, so that novel is called Network Effect. I also had it out from the library, but for some reason I found it very hard to concentrate on it, and I think it might have been the font. The typeface was the same as in the novellas, and I had the novellas, the last two, in physical format from the library, and I didn't have any trouble reading those. So the typeface was the same, but the font style was a bit narrower in the novel, and I think that might be the reason. Also, the line spacing was tighter, so that might have something to do with it as well. So I think I will have to buy the ebook and try again with that. Then I reread a book. I reread Dragons of Autumn Twilight by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. I actually read the original English book as an ebook, but I do have the Finnish translation. This is the one that I read in my teens. It's the one that I own. I got this in 1996. So I started my reread of this high fantasy series. This is the first book in the Dragonlance Chronicles. This is about a group of adventurer friends who go on a quest type of thing, and there's a half-elf and a dwarf and a human wizard and a human fighter and so on. You know the type of thing. I loved these in my early teens. These were one of the first fantasy series I ever read, and so the nostalgia is strong with this one, so keep that in mind, but I had so much fun rereading this. Yes, the writing is basic and the plot is clunky and all over the place, but it has this charm to it that I don't know if it's completely nostalgia, but I felt charmed. It also had some weirdness that I had forgotten. Like, I had completely forgotten that there was a chapter that had centaurs, a unicorn, and then also some Pegasi. I didn't remember that at all, so that might tell you that it wasn't the best part if I didn't remember it. I only remembered the spot illustration at the start of that chapter. One thing that's great about this is that there's so many characters on this adventurer friend group that everyone can have their own favorite. Raislin was my favorite as a kid, and he's still my favorite. He is the most interesting character in my opinion. My least favorite character is the Night Storm. I was flabbergasted to learn that he is 29 years old in this novel. I remembered that he was very old. I think he is described as having grey in his beard and said that he looks older than 29, but I completely thought that he was older than 29. So I updated my reactions to Goodreads while I read, and that was also a lot of fun because people were answering them. And I'm currently reading the second book, The Dragons of Winternight, and I am doing the same with that. So this is set in the Dragonlance D&D setting, and I didn't know D&D stuff as a kid. So when I read this, a lot of the stuff in this felt like very imaginative, like I thought it was made up for this book. Now that I read it, I can of course see that they are using specific D&D spells and traits from the game. Stuff like Taunt or certain spells like Featherfall. Now remember the nostalgia that I mentioned. My star rating is definitely influenced by nostalgia. If you're reading this for the first time as an adult with some fantasy knowledge, you probably won't like it as much. But I had so much fun and it was so nostalgic to read this, I gave it 4 stars. Next I read an owned ebook, and that was the middle grade fantasy A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. This is one of Kingfisher's books for younger readers, like Minor Mage was, and they are never my favorite ones from her. So this one tells about a baker girl with magic, but her magic only works on bread and dough, and I love that concept. So in the city where the girl works in a bakery with her aunt, there is this killer going around who is targeting people with magic. And there are also like bigger power political struggles going on. Like I said, Kingfisher's books for younger readers are never my favorites. I do prefer her stuff for adults, but I do enjoy how she mixes dark stuff in with the whimsy, even in these books for younger readers. And I also always like her practical protagonists. In this one I also like the message of how you can do big things with maybe outwardly simple skills, like things you are good at that maybe you don't think are a big deal, but maybe can be used more than you think and are maybe stronger than you think. Completely randomly, the idea of a sentient sourdough starter, which is in this book and which I had also heard before on Twitter about. So there's a sentient sourdough starter named Bob in this book. And that reminded me of the short animation I had seen when I visited the Ghibli studios in Japan. I'd seen the animation Mr. Dough and the Egg Princess. So it turned out that the sourdough starter was nothing like that. The plot was nothing like that. But the animation was just in my head constantly. So with that completely random thing out of the way, I gave this book 3 stars. Next I read from the library the science fiction novella Sisters of the Vast Black by Lena Rather. And this one is about a nun convent in a living spaceship. So think like a modified space slug, and the convent travels to different colonies and different planets to help people. So this follows a couple of different sisters, and I had a weird problem with this book, which is that I couldn't separate the characters in my head. I had such trouble remembering who was who, which sister was which, and they're all very different, but I learned that my brain doesn't like having sister in front of every name. It's confusing to it. So that's completely my failing. I liked how the sisters were used to doing stuff in their own way, so instead of focusing on strict doctrine, they focused on doing good instead. And the politics of the world were also quite interesting, and I did like this, but it lacked some sort of emotional connection with me. It was just something that I read. I didn't really feel a lot while reading it. There's also a thing that I didn't like that I won't mention because it's a spoiler, but if you have read the novel, I will link my Goodreads review. It's mentioned there in the spoiler tags. But yeah, this one was a thing I read, but I didn't, it wasn't very memorable. I gave it 3 stars. Then I continued reading the fantasy manga series Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama from the library. I read volumes 2 and 3. So this is about a girl who after an accident goes to study magic with this man who already has 3 other younger students. They're all girls, so it's about this group of girls learning to study together, basically. The magic itself is based on drawing symbols, which I find really cool. And there are also forbidden magics that you can't do, and there's this nefarious group of witches who do this sort of magic, and there's a very strict witch police, and it's quite interesting, and the art style is very beautiful. The first 2 volumes were very focused on studying magic and the 4 girls learning to study and work together, but then with volume 3 we start to get more interesting elements added, like the teacher is getting more levels, and you start to wonder what his goals are and what he is looking for, and I found it to be getting very interesting, and I look forward to reading more. I gave the second volume 3 stars and the third volume 4 stars. And finally I read another manga. I read the non-fiction memoir manga Blank Canvas, My So-Called Artist's Journey volume 1. This is volume 2, I'm just holding it up, and it's by Akiko Higashimura, and I'm borrowing these from the library. So this is the story of the author becoming a mangaka. This is the creator of Princess Jellyfish, which you might have heard about and which I really like. So it starts when she is a high schooler and she wants to be a mangaka from a very early age, and she is trying to get into art school. So the first volume is about her studying art and then going to the entrance exams. So she's taking these art classes under this quite peculiar teacher who, like Higashimura, almost depicts like he's misunderstood, and like in some ways it is shown that he does care about the students, but he's also shown using like physical abuse. It's sort of portrayed as horrifying but in a sort of funny way. So even though the art teacher might care for the students, he's still abusive. I'm not quite sure if Higashimura feels that way or if she has like rationalized it in her head. But anyway, apart from that, her dream of becoming a mangaka, like she has a very different kind of personality to me. So it's interesting to follow. Like she's so sure of her skills, at least at first. I also went to art school and I found the art school exam parts to be very interesting because I could compare it to my exams and some things were very familiar while some things were very different. And I gave the first volume 3 stars. So now we move on to the receipts. Did I make progress in my 10 books to read in 2020 list? And no, I didn't. But I did make progress in my reread challenge because I started my reread of the Dragonlance Chronicles by finishing Dragons of Autumn Twilight. Then we're moving on to the TBR chart challenge. I still have the challenge read a book featured in a book haul revisit open, but I'm gonna also pick a second one. You might remember that I had 2 prompts going on at the same time a while ago, but then I was so behind on my reads and receipts that I did them so late that I couldn't have time to finish a prompt that given month. But now that I have caught up, I will get another prompt from this jar. So the one from the bottom. I have no idea what prompts I put in here. Prettiest cover. I have to think on this. I'm not sure if I can pick one right away. So now we're moving on to the haul part. I got a couple of e-copies. I got Frankie and the Creepy Cute Critters by Caitlin Rose Boyle, which is a review copy that I got from NetGalley, and this is a middle grade fantasy comic. And then I bought Victor Laval's Destroyer by Victor Laval and Dietrich Smith. I'm gonna read this for the Fortnite Frights readathon, and this one is a Frankenstein retelling, I think in modern day, a comic, if I didn't say. And then I also bought Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin, and I also got the audiobook for that for free, and it's a short story. It's a science fiction short story, and the audiobook is read by Jason Isaacs. I actually don't know what it's about, but it's Jemisin, so I bought it. And then I bought a bunch of physical manga. I bought Versailles of the Dead Volume 1 by Kumiko Suekane, which I'm reading for Fortnite Frights. And this one is about Marie Antoinette and the French court and zombies, except that Marie Antoinette is killed on the way to the French court and her place is taken by her twin brother Albert. I have A Gentle Noble's Vacation recommendation by Misaki Momochi and Sando, and this one is about this nobleman who gets transported to another world and basically hires this guy to be his tour guide. He's not even from our world, he's from a different fancy world, and then he's transported to another fancy world. And I just bought this because I leafed through it in the store and it looked like fun. And finally I picked up Requiem of the Rose King Volume 1 by Aya Kanno, and this one is set during the Wars of the Roses. That and the cover was pretty much why I picked it up. I also have another manga from Aya Kanno out from the library, Ottoman Volume 1, and it looks really different to this one. So I went back and looked at my video from the start of the year where I talk about reads and receipts, and there I said that I wouldn't be counting my physical comics for the TBR count this year because I read these so quickly. So finally we're moving on to the stats. In September I read 8 books. That was 1,772 pages. On average I read 59 pages a day and took on average 5 days to read a book. And since I didn't read any physical books of mine in September, my current TBR count is still 68 books. So that was my September reads and receipts. I have finally caught up with my reads and receipts. Let's hope that it stays this way. And that's all from me for now, and I'll see you in my next video.